You're standing somewhere in Africa 74,000 years ago. Except, you can't see the sun. You haven't seen it in months. The sky isn't blue, it's a permanent, sickly gray. During the day, it's dim like twilight. At night, the horizon glows an eerie, unnatural red. The trees around you are dying. The animals your family depends on for food, antelope, zebra, they're nothing but skin and bones now, collapsing in the dust. The rivers taste wrong. Acidic. And you have no idea why. You have no idea that 9,000 kilometers away, on what will one day be called the island of Sumatra, the ground just opened up. And the largest volcanic eruption in 2.5 million years is about to test whether your species deserves to exist at all. This is not a disaster movie. This is not speculation. This actually happened, and if your ancestors hadn't figured out how to survive it, you and I would not be here right now. Hook. Option B, bold statement. There was a moment in human history, 74,000 years ago, when the entire population of our species may have been reduced to fewer people than the capacity of a single football stadium. 3,000 to 10,000 human beings. On the entire planet, think about that. Every person you've ever seen. Every city you've ever visited. Every war, every invention, every love story in the last 74,000 years. All of it traces back to a group of survivors smaller than a small town. The question is, how? Hook. Option C, personal/immersive. What you're about to hear is the story of how our species looked extinction in the face, and not only survived, but came out stronger. It begins with the Earth splitting open. It ends with a discovery in a cave on the coast of South Africa that changes everything we thought we knew about our ancestors. And somewhere in the middle, there's a single microscopic shard of glass, smaller than a human hair, that traveled 9,000 kilometers through the sky to tell us the truth. The setup, what actually happened. Let's rewind to 74,000 years ago. On the island of Sumatra, in what is now Indonesia, there was a volcano. Not the kind you see in Hollywood movies, a single mountain with smoke drifting lazily from the top. This was a supervolcano, and it had been building pressure for hundreds of thousands of years. When it finally blew, it didn't just erupt. It detonated. The Toba supereruption ejected 2,800 cubic kilometers of rock, ash, and gas into the atmosphere. To put that number in perspective, the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, which famously flattened 600 square kilometers of forest, ejected less than 1 cubic kilometer of material. Toba was nearly 3,000 times larger. The eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815, also in Indonesia, ejected about 50 cubic kilometers. That was enough to cause the year without a summer. Crops failed across Europe and North America. Famine. Mass migration. And Tambora was a firecracker compared to Toba. The crater Toba left behind, which you can still see today as Lake Toba, is 100 kilometers long and 30 kilometers wide. That's roughly the size of the city of Los Angeles. The catastrophe unfolds. The column of fire, rock, and superheated gas shot 30 to 40 kilometers into the stratosphere, 3 to 4 times the cruising altitude of a commercial airliner. Within hours, everything within hundreds of kilometers was buried under meters of ash. But that wasn't the real killer. Hundreds of millions of tons of sulfur dioxide were injected into the stratosphere, where they converted into sulfate aerosols, tiny reflective particles that act like a planetary sunshade. According to climate model simulations published in the journal Nature in 2021, led by Sergei Osipov, these aerosols cut global temperatures by an estimated 3.5 to 9 degrees Celsius. Sunlight reaching the Earth's surface was reduced by anywhere from 25 to 90%. Let me say that again. Up to 90% less sunlight. Photosynthesis, the foundation of every food chain on Earth, essentially broke down. Plants died. The animals that ate those plants died. The predators that ate those animals died. It was a domino effect at planetary scale, and this wasn't a single bad year. The volcanic winter is estimated to have lasted 6 to 10 years, possibly longer, with a 1,000-year cooling period following it. The Toba catastrophe theory. In 1998, a scientist named Stanley Ambrose at the University of Illinois proposed something terrifying that he looked at the genetic diversity of modern humans and noticed something strange. We are remarkably genetically uniform compared to other primates. A single troop of chimpanzees in West Africa has more genetic diversity than the entire human species. That's not normal. Something had to explain it. Ambrose proposed what became known as the Toba catastrophe hypothesis. His argument: the Toba eruption caused a human population bottleneck so severe that our numbers crashed to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 breeding individuals. For years, this became the dominant narrative. The imagery was powerful. Humanity, the species that would eventually build cities, fly to the moon, and sequence its own genome, reduced to a handful of terrified survivors huddled in whatever refuges they could find. The evidence seemed to line up. Genetic studies had already identified what appeared to be a bottleneck in human ancestry around this time. The dates matched. The scale of the disaster was undeniable. For 2 decades, generations of students, including me, learned this story as fact. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because as archaeologists kept digging, literally, they started finding things that didn't fit the catastrophe narrative at all. The discovery at Pinnacle Point. Let me take you to the southern tip of South Africa, a place called Pinnacle Point, near the town of Mossel Bay. It's a coastline of dramatic cliffs, sea caves, and some of the richest archaeological deposits anywhere on Earth. For nearly 20 years, a team led by Dr. Curtis Marion, foundation professor at Arizona State University's School of Human Evolution and Social Change and associate director of the Institute of Human Origins, has been excavating caves. Their Point 1 site in particular, Pinnacle Point 5 to 6, has been occupied by humans continuously from 90,000 to 50,000 years ago. That's 40,000 years of continuous habitation. And 74,000 years ago, something microscopic fell out of the sky and landed there. In 2018, the team published a paper in the journal Nature. Dr. Panayotis Karkanis, director of the Wiener Laboratory for Archaeological Science in Greece, was examining a slice of archaeological sediment under a microscope, millions of mineral particles, sand, shell fragments. And then he saw a single shard of volcanic glass. It had a distinctive hooked shape, formed when molten glass fractures across a gas bubble. Under a microscope, it looks almost like a tiny comma or a question mark. Eugene Smith, a volcanologist at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, confirmed what they suspected. The chemical fingerprint of that shard matched Toba exactly. This microscopic piece of glass had been blasted 30 kilometers into the sky over Sumatra and then drifted nearly 9,000 kilometers to the southern coast of Africa before settling into the floor of a cave where humans were living. And here's the crucial part, the part that rewrites the story. No gap. No collapse. They thrived. When the team examined the sediment layers above and below the Toba glass shard, they found something that contradicted the catastrophe narrative. There was no gap. The layer below the shard, from before the eruption, contained stone tools, evidence of fire, food remains. The layer containing the shard, from during the eruption, showed the exact same thing. And the layer above, from after the eruption, didn't just show continuity. It showed more. More tools. More complex technology. More signs of human activity. As Curtis Marion's team reported in Nature. Not only did humans at Pinnacle Point survive the Toba eruption without any apparent disruption, they actually appeared to thrive afterward. And Pinnacle Point wasn't alone. Archaeological sites across India, in both the north and south, have now yielded evidence that human populations there also survived the eruption without obvious collapse. Sites in Ethiopia show the same. Evidence from China, published more recently, reinforces this picture. The emerging scientific consensus has shifted dramatically. John Hawks, a paleoanthropologist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, put it bluntly in a widely read 2018 article. The so-called Toba bottleneck simply didn't happen. The genetic bottleneck that scientists had attributed to Toba? More recent analyses place it much earlier, around 900,000 years ago, and associate it with a completely separate event that reduced the human population to perhaps 1,280 individuals. 74 0.000 years ago, when Toba erupted. Humans were already broadly spread across Africa and had expanded into Eurasia. And the archaeological evidence now strongly suggests that while populations near the eruption were undoubtedly wiped out, populations further away not only survived, many barely noticed. How they actually survived. So the question shifts. It's no longer did they survive? The evidence is clear that they did. The question becomes, how? And the answer is hidden in what the people at Pinnacle Point were eating. Pinnacle Point holds the earliest evidence of systematic shellfish exploitation by humans, dating back 164,000 years. Our ancestors there weren't just occasionally picking up shellfish. They were systematically harvesting marine resources. They understood tides. They knew which species were most nutritious. They cooked and processed them in ways that maximized caloric return. The coastline of South Africa offered something that inland areas couldn't, a food source that was almost immune to the effects of a volcanic winter. Think about it. Land-based food chains depend on plants. Plants depend on sunlight. When the sunlight disappears, the entire chain collapses. But marine food chains? They depend on phytoplankton, which are far more resilient to short-term atmospheric changes. Shellfish, in particular, filter feed on nutrients that circulate regardless of surface temperature. They don't need grass. They don't need leaves. They're essentially a direct pipeline to the ocean's stored energy. Researchers at Pinnacle Point also found evidence of a rich diet that included geophytes, underground storage organs of plants like bulbs and tubers. These are plants that keep their energy reserves below ground, protected from surface conditions. Even if the above-ground vegetation died, our ancestors could dig up carbohydrate-rich roots. The coastal location itself provided another advantage: thermal buffering. Oceans heat and cool slowly. Even if global temperatures dropped several degrees, the immediate coastal zone would have stayed more moderate than inland areas. The secret weapon: social networks. But there's another piece to this puzzle, and it might be the most important one. Archaeological evidence from across southern Africa shows that around the time of the Toba eruption, and continuing afterward, there was an explosion of symbolic behavior. Ochre, a red mineral used as pigment, appears in abundance. Engraved ostrich eggshells. Shell beads. These aren't just pretty objects, they're evidence of something profound: identity, symbolism, and, critically, long-distance social networks. Dr. Stanley Ambrose, the same scientist who proposed the catastrophe theory, later contributed to research suggesting that the key to survival wasn't just technology or diet. It was cooperation. Groups that maintained connections with other groups, through trade, marriage alliances, shared knowledge, had a massive survival advantage. If your local water source went bad, you knew another group. If your hunting grounds were devastated, you had allies who could share territory. If a crisis hit, you weren't alone. The Pleistocene social contract, as some researchers now call it, wasn't just about being nice. It was an evolutionary survival strategy. Humans who cooperated survived. Humans who isolated themselves died. Curtis Marian's team at ASU has argued that the South African coastline during glacial periods, including the Toba event, functioned as a refugium. Not just because of the food and the climate, but because the density of human populations there allowed for the exchange of innovations, resources, and genetic material between groups. The innovation boom. And here's the twist that completely inverts the old narrative. The Toba catastrophe hypothesis assumed that populations collapsed and innovation stopped. What the archaeological record actually shows is the opposite. The AT sites across southern Africa, the period after Toba, coincides with a significant technological shift. Simple prepared core technology gave way to microlithic technology, tiny, precisely shaped stone blades that could be hafted onto handles to create composite tools. These were lighter, more efficient, and allowed for more versatile hunting strategies. At Pinnacle Point itself, the team found evidence of heat treatment of stone. Silkrete, a local rock, was deliberately heated in fire to improve its flaking properties. This isn't a trivial innovation. It requires controlling temperature within a specific range. It involves planning and experimentation. It demonstrates that our ancestors at this time were not just surviving. They were engineering. The coastal diet also provided something crucial: omega-3 fatty acids from marine resources. These are essential for brain development. Some researchers have argued that access to marine nutrients at sites like Pinnacle Point may have actually accelerated cognitive and technological advancement during periods when inland populations were struggling to so the revised picture looks like this. Populations near the Toba eruption in Southeast Asia were devastated. But in coastal refugia thousands of kilometers away, especially in southern Africa, humans not only weathered the event, but used the challenge as a catalyst. The pressure selected for cooperation, innovation, and adaptability. What this means for US today. There's something deeply humbling about this story, and something deeply empowering. Your ancestors looked extinction in the face. They didn't have technology we would recognize. They didn't have writing, agriculture, or metal. What they had was each other. They had knowledge passed down through generations: which plants were edible, how to read the tides, which stones made the best tools. They had social bonds that extended beyond their immediate group. They had the ability to adapt, to innovate under pressure, to share resources, and every single one of those qualities is encoded in you. The cooperation, the resilience, the problem-solving, the genetic diversity of our entire species, all 8 billion of us, tells this story. Because the population that survived Toba and the other bottlenecks of prehistory left their imprint in our DNA. We are less genetically diverse than almost any other primate. Chimpanzees in a single forest have more genetic variation between them than any two humans on opposite sides of the planet. That's not a flaw. That's a scar, a record of survival. It means that at some point in our past, our ancestors were few. And the reason we're here is that they were enough. The microscopic messenger. I want to return to that single microscopic glass shard, the one Panayotis carcanas found at Pinnacle Point. A fragment smaller than a human hair. Think about the journey it took. Blasted out of an Indonesian volcano. Carried 30 kilometers into the stratosphere. Drifting for weeks across the Indian Ocean. Descending over the southern tip of Africa. Settling into the floor of a cave where a small group of humans were going about their daily lives. Cooking shellfish, sharpening tools, teaching their children how to read the waves. Those humans had no idea something terrible had happened on the other side of the world. They didn't know what a volcano was. They couldn't have imagined the scale of the eruption, but they kept living. They kept innovating. They kept cooperating. And because they did, here we are. 74,000 years later. 8 billion strong. Still carrying their DNA. Still cooperating. Still innovating. Still surviving. Call to action. If you made it to the end of this video, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Someone who understands that the most incredible stories ever told aren't fiction. They happened. To us. To our ancestors. This is just the first episode of Before Us. Next time, we're going even deeper into the past, to a genetic bottleneck 900,000 years ago that reduced our ancestors to just over 1,200 individuals. For more than 100,000 years, the entire human lineage clung to existence by a thread. If you want to be there when that story drops, subscribe now. And before you go, I have a question for you. If you had been alive 74,000 years ago, at Pinnacle Point or anywhere else on Earth, what do you think you would have contributed to your group's survival? The hunting? The gathering? The toolmaking? The social diplomacy? Drop your answer in the comments. I read all of them. This is Before Us. And there's so much more to tell.